What's going on, guys? Scar coming at you with another Magic the Gathering video. And today's gonna be doing something that we kind of already did once on the channel, and kind of from feedback that I've gotten, I kind of want to go back through and kind of recreate today's video. Today's video is actually going to be a beginner's guide to what is draft, the different things that you can do in draft, and kind of how overall draft works. With that being said, I kind of use your guys' constructive feedback on what you give me. So based on your feedback, I'm going to be updating this, kind of making it a little bit more, better for newer players, a little bit more understanding. We're gonna go simple here, and I'm actually gonna, with this video, I'm actually gonna separate this into multiple parts, just in case, depending on where your level is for drafting. Maybe you are at least past a beginner, but not like super confident being like a professional drafter. We're gonna have different parts where I kind of go over various things, kind of be labeled down below. But first and foremost, guys, if you like the video, it definitely helps me out a lot. Lets me know you guys kind of like these videos, lets me know to create more of these videos of this style. If you guys have any more questions, leave a comment down below. I'm usually pretty good about responding to most comments pretty quick most of the time. Sometimes I'm actually even by my computer. With me working from home now, it makes it a lot easier. When I see a comment pop up, I can actually easily respond to it pretty quickly. With that being said, guys, let's dive into the video. Let's talk about what is MTG draft. So I think the first part to start with, what is an MTG draft, or what is a Magic draft in that sense? Draft is a game type in Magic the Gathering, arena or online or physical Magic. Essentially, it is a game type where you essentially are put into groups of essentially 5 other people other than yourself. 6 I feel like is the comfortable minimum, but typically it's groups of 8 at the max. And essentially you're put into these groups where you're going to each get 3 packs, and you essentially now have to pick cards from these packs and create a 40 card deck. The way you do this is pretty simple. It's pretty self-explanatory. Sure, it can be a little over cumbersome in a sense the first few times you do it, just because you're still getting familiar with the rules. But essentially the way it works is you open your first pack, you're going to take your first card, you're going to pick it between any of the cards in that pack. I know in physical Magic, typically the tokens get tossed into like the middle or, out of the pack, because it doesn't really count as a pick. I'm not sure about lands, because I know sometimes the lands could be other things. You keep the foil in the pack as well. So that's the only time where you don't take the token card out. But with that being said, you are going to pick your first card. You're going to take that card and you're going to pass it counterclockwise. So you're going to pass it to your left, if that makes sense. You're going to pass it to the player to your left. The player to your right is not going to pass you their pack that they pick from. You take the next card from that pack. You're going to keep on doing this rotation to your left or counterclockwise until essentially no cards are left. Then you move on to the second pack, doing the same thing you did in the first pack with everything, where you're going to pick your first card, but instead of doing it to counterclockwise or to your left, you're going to pass it clockwise or to your right. And essentially this kind of helps it random it up, kind of essentially allowing you to pick after you have probably to your left this time, kind of seeing where, possibly they're playing. And essentially you do the same thing, you rotate it around, and you keep on doing all the cards until all the cards are gone. Then you open the third and final pack, and you rotate it once more to your left or counterclockwise, and essentially make a 40 card deck out of these cards you are picking. So that's actually the basis of how a draft works. We're going to get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty details a little bit further down, when I kind of go over some tips and strategies on how to go about picking the cards and what to look out for. But the next thing you want to know is probably like the different draft styles. So in physical Magic, and Magic the Gathering Online, from my research and what I did, there's definitely different formats you can definitely run into if you are playing this in person or online on the other client of Magic the Gathering Online. And essentially typically you'll see is 3 matches, get as many wins as possible. That's a very popular one. It keeps the draft kind of short. You play 3 best of 3 matches. That's the other thing too. Typical draft is in a best of 3 format. That's how traditional Magic is. That's why you may see traditional Magic pop up a lot of times on MTG Arena. I know the very popular thing on MTG Arena is best of 1, but traditionally Magic is played in a best of 3 format. Helps with the game balance and allows you to kind of like maybe combat what your opponent's trying to come at you with their deck. So 3 matches, and you get rewarded based on how many wins you get if you in your 3 matches you do play. The next one up is single elimination. You can play in a tournament, with your 8 people, and essentially you just play until there's only 1 person left, and essentially that's, maybe that person wins the prize that way. And then the third and other option that you may see in normal tournaments do is actually like a Swiss style draft, where you essentially get paired up against, maybe the rest of the group in a way, and you essentially just kind of do best record until like the best 2 are left in the finals, and essentially they play for possibly the prize. That is kind of like on how that works. But in MTG Arena, we have pretty much similar options with just a couple of different variations. We have a quick draft, which is a best of 1 format. You draft against bots or robots or AI, whatever you want to call them. And this is definitely a good area to start with, especially if you're new in Magic the Gathering and draft in that part. Just essentially drafting against bots, there's not as much pressure of you know, you're actually having to draft against players, though you do have to eventually play those players, and the prize pool kind of varies depending on that. I think it's a little bit less than the Premier Draft, which is the other version of Best of One Draft, and essentially this is the same thing as before. The only difference, instead of drafting against bots, you're drafting against players, and you're now in a player pot of, you know, 7 other people. MTG arena drafts are actually, you're always with pods of 8 when you do draft, and then the traditional draft, which is the best of 3 magic, where you play, you know, you still draft against players. It's best of 3 format, and you only play your 3 matches and kind of see how you do. So essentially you're playing 9 games if you know, have to go to 3 games for each one of those rounds, and you get rewarded based on how many wins you get in that format. And depending on how you feel and where you're comfortable with and what your level of Magic knowledge may be, you can kind of figure out where in these different formats, whether it's arena or even in person, which one works out best for you. I would say a lot of times, especially if you're newer, a lot of times most Magic groups are pretty friendly and, you know, helping new people kind of get acclimated to the game. It's a little bit different. You know, you really can't rely or lean on people for questions when it comes to, you know, playing the games online, because a lot of people are, you know, there's no chat, especially in MTG Arena, to even chat with people. But you know, that's one of those things you can pick up on. You know, you can always ask people for tips and things like that. There's definitely a lot of resources on the internet as well if you really are unsure of like where to start and how to do it. And the one thing I can't really explain is, you know, it's one of those things that just takes practice and you know, in-game knowledge of Magic to kind of really understand the true intricacies of each set and how to draft them. But from playing it and then doing various drafts, you'll definitely get an understanding of how it works. So moving on to the next section, and the next section is actually going over some a little bit more advanced tips, kind of going a little bit more into, you know, where I need to start, what to look out for, how to do like a decent draft, and kind of overall set you up for hopefully success even in your first draft. So the first pack, you may want to look for the most impactful card. You're looking for that big, you know, emphasis. Sure, it may be the rare card or the mythic card, depending if you get lucky enough to get a mythic card, essentially in that sense. The other thing too you got to look out for is actually like uncommons and commons. As much as, you know, typical you know, normal standard play or constructed play of Magic, some of these cards aren't always as powerful in those formats, but in limited, where you're in a much restricted card pool, it's actually sometimes better to actually play some of these big, more impactful cards that even could be expensive, just because your card pool is so limited. So looking for that big impactful card in your first few picks is definitely something you're going to want to look out for. The next thing here too is also early in a draft, you never want to lock down a particular color, because most people like yourself are still trying to figure out, you know, what cards they're playing. So this is where your color option may vary. Your first 3-4 picks even, you may still not have an idea of what color you are playing. So that is one of those things that you will develop as you play, getting familiar with cards. That's one of those things. Also, I know in Arena at least, there is that timer that you have to do, so sometimes it's a little tougher, you know, early on when you're still reading cards and trying to understand what the cards do. So getting that prior knowledge before jumping into draft is always good. And then, like I said, even in in-person drafts, sometimes they're very friendly, but sometimes you get those people who just want the draft to move around. So if you're starting to stack at piles to your right or left, you know, sometimes it creates an overwhelming sensation. So to follow up these first 2 points, the next thing you want to do is have a good mana curve. So essentially you want a good mana curve in draft. Essentially you want to look for, you know, cards that you can play definitely early. You want to play them consistently, and you kind of want to set yourself, you know, for a decent late game. So the way when I say curve, this is essentially cards that cast in a certain, you know, cast in like a curve where they go up like a graph. You know, eventually they kind of curve up in a way. As you get more mana, you know, you can play 2 drops, 3 drops, 4 drops, 5 drops, so on and so forth. That's kind of what we call a curve. It's just the casting cost of spells that you have in your deck, and to have a good, like, even playing a, you know, having a good pocket of those spells that are kind of diverse, but, you know, not clumped together is definitely a good thing. So, you know, having a good curve with tons of spells in the 2 to 4 drop range is probably the most, like, you know, it's that nice ideal thing. Sure, you can have things that cost very expensive, but you don't want to have like 8-7 drops and then have you know, couple 4 5, you know, 3 2 and 1 drops scattered about, because, you know, you're going to draw your 7 drop and you're not going to be there to actually play that. The next thing too, to kind of go on with having a decent curve, is the next thing you want to probably put about 17-ish lands in the deck, give or take, depending on what your curve is. 17 is that kind of ideal sweet spot, because we're only playing at least 40 cards in our main draft deck. 17 cards works out to then being able to play 23 various spells in your deck. So that's kind of like a good basis there. I know sometimes it gets a little bit more tricky if you kind of start splashing some other colors in your deck, but 17 lands is the goal you want to shoot for when it comes to lands. Like I've kind of stated before, having some decent knowledge of the set you're drafting actually helps. With call time coming out at the recording of this video, having kind of an idea of what cards to look out for when you go to draft is actually ideal. If there's a particular removal card or a particular spell that's in that uncommon and common range, just because those are at least more common to see multiple copies of in a draft than it is when it comes to rares and mythics. Kind of getting that knowledge of knowing what's good in a limited format, it's always good. I can't think off the top of my head, but I know there's a few decent removal cards and also like cards that have good synergies of one another in Kaldheim coming out. So getting that knowledge is definitely gonna help you out, and it's definitely gonna put you like above people who may be, you know, unsure of exactly what to look out for. And like I stated before, uncommon and common cards are actually the cards you're going to see the most of, and these are definitely gonna be the cards that are going to be most impactful in your deck, because essentially you could draft, you know, 3 rares in your deck, but the rest of your deck is going to be consisted of these uncommon and common cards. So looking out for those key ones, like key spot removal, key, you know, uncommon and common creatures. Typically there's some really good uncommon creatures that you can definitely get in a draft, and you know that could set you up for victory every time you play them just because they're that good. You know, I can think of a few on the top of my head, but I'm going to be going into that a little bit later. But you know, those are the cards you want to get. Having that knowledge of what those cards are, depending on the color, you know, the set and whatnot, is definitely something you're going to want to get. So here we kind of come to the, when it comes to card selection, like how do I, and like what's the best way so I can remember on how to have a solid draft. And actually the funny thing is, in multiple draft you know, help articles I did find, just to do some little bit of research to kind of give you guys a better idea of how to do this, a lot of them use this analogy. It sounds dumb, but the analogy is actually called bread. And you can be like, what, we're talking about the loaf of bread? No, we're actually talking about the way this breaks down. So what you should be, this is how you should draft based on priority. So the B in bread stands for big cards. You want to look for those cards that can be high impact. You know, if you get a very big high impact mythic or rare in your set, that's that card that will definitely, when you play that card, is a key card that's going to set you up for success when you do play that particular card. Sure, there's also uncommon and common cards that can also be these big impact cards, but typically you want a few big impact cards that when you play it, it could actually shift the momentum of the game in your favor, especially if you're behind. The R in bread is actually removal. Removal cards are key in a deck, essentially, you know, slowing your opponent down or stopping them from, you know, their creatures doing what they're doing. Having a decent amount of removal in your deck is definitely going to help you keep your opponent's board clean. If you draft, you know, at least I would say, if you're probably playing a deck of 20, you're looking for 23 spells, you're probably looking for like 6 or 7 removal spells would probably be a decent amount. And by removal, depending on the color, it actually varies depending on that. But like I said, you know, stopping your opponent from hitting your life points and also keeping their side of the board clean without actually having to sacrifice creatures is definitely gonna be a key way to kind of take advantage of your opponent. So removal is gonna be your next priority after these big impact cards. After that, we move on to E, which is like evasion. So you may be thinking to yourself, well, the cards don't really have an ability called evasion. Well, evasion just means that there's cards that are just harder to deal with. So they have things like hexproof, which essentially, you know, they can't be targeted by your opponent's spells. They have fly-in, because a lot of cards, you know, fly-in is actually one of those abilities that actually is surprisingly very good in draft, because people, you know, there's high impact cards that you can definitely have on the ground, but when you have a pesky flyer that's flying over all that, you know, it's definitely something that gets annoying very quickly. Something like first strike or even double strike is another good thing, because having your creature you know, do their damage before your opponent's creature does their damage is definitely very good. Sure, double strike is even better because now you're going to be doing damage over, especially if you're attacking, but having that first strike ability or being able to do their damage first is definitely going to be something that's going to give you that advantage. Also, menace is another very good solid card that gives you decent advantage, because now your opponent has to commit 2 cards in order to block that one creature that you're attacking with, and definitely create some problems for them on how they have to block your creatures outright. And the kind of combination of having a little bit of all of these will definitely put your opponent in a bind, just because it'll be definitely hard to deal with some of these cards and things like that. Follow that up, we have the A, which is aggro. Most controlled decks, most draft decks are actually more aggressive. That's the idea. You want to be very aggressive. You want to, you know, create a lot of pressure for your opponent, because like I said, the cards are very limited. It's definitely hard for your opponent to deal with a lot of things. So creating that constant pressure is definitely going to be the way you want to pick your cards. So aggro cards are just cards that are attack aggressively. They have abilities that help you win quickly and fast. So those are the cards you want to look out for. Let's just say you have a card that when you swing in, it gains target trigger ability when this creature attacks along with another creature. it's just definitely going to help you out in that way. And then of course, you know, D is duds. Sure, there's one of those things because it's draft. Don't get upset or worried that you drafted a very particular card that's only good for one particular thing. Sure, maybe in a best of one style draft, you're never going to really use that, but you know, it happens. You know, you're in a limited card pool. There's definitely gonna be cards that no one wants, regardless of color. And these cards are just those duds that, you know, just maybe you'll get lucky. You have a spell that deals damage to a creature with flying, but even though you haven't seen a flying creature on your opponent's board, it's kind of a dud. So that's kind of like on how you want to go about your draft and how your draft strategy should go. Some other tips that you may want to look for is you want to look for synergies, things that kind of work together in tandem, kind of go along with what I said before. It's actually these other cards you want to kind of like draft and kind of like figure out. So depending on your set, we'll say Zendikar Horizon just because it's a set that's currently out. Drafting Rogues is very good because Rogues is a tribe that we definitely see a lot of. We know we see a lot of because we play them in the meta. Sure, we don't have, you know, the one rogue where we mill every time we play a rogue, but we have other rogues that synergize very well. Like for example, you know, you can always play the Sorin Thought Thief, which is definitely a very pesky rogue card. It has flash, it has fly-in. Whenever you attack with a rogue, your opponent mills 2 cards from the top of their library, and then if you get 8 or more cards in your opponent's graveyard, you then get all your rogues have +1/+0. Combine that with something like Merfolk Windrobber. These are rogues that synergize together because it's another rogue. The other thing with the Merfolk Windrider is the fact that when you attack and it deals damage to your opponent, it's actually going to mill them at least a card when it deals that damage. And in the later game, if you really need to draw some more cards, you can actually sacrifice it and draw more cards. But on top of it, it will gain the advantage of the +1/+0. And even this little bit of chunk damage that you see here, this is that little bit of damage, especially in draft because it's a limited format and a little bit slower. This damage adds up very quickly, especially in this limited format. Kind of taking that script, we're going to flip into call time, just to kind of get you set up here. Just for that little call time tip, you know, I kind of been looking on some websites to kind of get some ideas of some of the new cards that we're getting. Of course, the spoilers are pretty cool. I'm actually very intrigued about this set, but that's a different discussion for a different video. There's a card called Frenzy Raider and Tuskeri Firewalker, and these are actually 2 cards that use this new ability called Boast. If you don't know what it is, I actually explained it in another video. I don't know if there's gonna be a link or something up top. I'll try my best to remember it at this spot. But essentially the way this works, Boast is this ability whenever you attack with a creature, you essentially pay the Boast cost of the card. And the way this works is the Frenzy Raider actually gets +1/+1 counters on it every time you boast with a creature. So it's a 2-drop, I believe 2/2, and then essentially gets pumped up every time you boast. And the other one is, I think, a 3/2 with a boast ability of 1 colorless. And essentially whenever you attack in with the 1 and boast, the other one will get pumped up with the +1/+1 counter. That synergy in a limited meta is actually very strong because eventually if your opponent can't deal with your creature that's boasting, and now you have +1/+1 counters on this other creature, and so now it's a 3/3, then eventually a 4/4, so on and foremost, it's eventually going to become so big that your opponent really can't deal with it unless they have some sort of like removal that just, you know, gets rid of target creature. So that is something to look out for, especially in drafting. And like I said, it goes back to having that knowledge of what's in the set. I'm sure if you looked online and you want to find like a draft guide or draft strategy possibly on Call Time, I'm sure as we kind of get up into Call Time releasing next Thursday, you'll kind of see that stuff pop up on the internet. Who knows, maybe I'll even make a video. We'll see how the timing goes on that. But that is another thing that you want to look out for. Synergies are key to kind of go along with that bread strategy. After that, you know, one thing you may want to do, especially even in person or in physical draft, you want to read the signals of the table. This is something you definitely pick up the more experience you have in draft, but reading the signals of the table are seeing things like what cards are being passed around. Are there particular cards that your opponents are taking that you're noticing that aren't coming back around to you? Is there a particular color that's just completely open, as if it seems like no one's drafting that particular color? You know, it's one of those things that at some point people start committing to colors, and eventually, you know, there's sometimes in some groups there's just a color that just seems wide open. You just seem to be getting these particular color cards, you know, getting passed around the table. You know, depending on the strength, you know, certain colors are a lot stronger than other colors depending on the set. But, you know, at the same time too, you may have the advantage of taking a particular color that no one's taken and kind of, you know, either splashing that color or maybe splitting the color with your deck. So you may go from being a mono blue deck to then eventually being a blue black deck, or eventually being a blue green deck, depending on what colors are open, or maybe drop blue altogether and just seems like there's green's wide open. You just become a whole green deck and just have to drop that, you know, blue cards in your deck, along with also figuring out what reading the table is also kind of figuring out maybe what your opponents are playing. If you're playing physical Magic, this actually is a little bit different than playing online, because I know online you get paired against other random people who may not even be in your pod. But in physical Magic, you know, you could get an idea of what your opponents are playing based on what cards you've seen being passed around and not seen, you know, come back around, if that makes sense. And that helps you out too, especially kind of figuring out, okay, I saw this powerful card, I passed it because I took this other powerful card that fits better with my deck strategy. But, you know, as you pass, you know, one way to the left and then one way to the right, you kind of pick up maybe the person to your right is playing this particular card, maybe the person to your left is playing this particular card based on the cards that are passed. That's just one of those things that you definitely pick up on as you kind of, you know, play more draft. And the final thought, I think, on all of this is, you know, the one thing that helps anybody with anything, it's just repetition. The more you do it, the better you become. The more you practice the strategy when it comes to drafting, the better the drafter you become. And that being said, I mean, it sounds great. I mean, I definitely, by doing the research, I've definitely learned a lot. I actually had no idea about the bread strategy, which I think, especially for me when I was younger and I started playing Magic, this definitely would help me with a few drafts, because at the same, you know, sometimes I would just pick a card just because, you know, I thought it was a good card, but come to find out it doesn't really follow any of the first 4 parts of bread. It's really more of the D, and that no one wants a dud in their deck. That's not going to be very good. With that being said, guys, I'm going to be wrapping up the video. I mean, I hope you like this. I hope this is a little bit better of an improvement. I mean, like I said, let me know in the comments below if there's any questions you guys have that I want to further go upon. I would do like a draft. Maybe I'll do a draft on channel to help more explain different picks. I just think that, you know, it's definitely very situational. Like, my draft experience is not going to be the same as your draft experience, because we're going to set at different tables. We're going to get different packs and things like that. But that being said, guys, if you like the video, hit that like button. If you want to post more videos, hit that subscribe button, and I will see you in the next video.